If you're fat, your brain is not working as well as it could. You're underperforming. You don't have to do much more than walking. This is stuff that we're designed to do, and I think we overcomplicate things. Try carnivore, try going plant-based. But what you don't need to do is eat all this fake meat crap that they're trying to sell you. The shockingly low quality of food in America is something that you don't really realize as an American until you leave America. And we can't even export the same version of our drinks, packaged food, snacks, and chips to other countries because these second and third world countries have higher standards than we do for our foods.
As an entrepreneur, busy as hell, what are the easiest ways to adjust your diet?
I say just prioritize.
Abel James, I am excited to have you here, man.
Let's rock. I'm stoked.
We were just talking before we officially hit record about the litany of different directions we could go with this.
Yeah.
But people know you from The Wild Diet, host of Fat Burning Man podcast, which was launched fucking 13 years ago.
Yeah.
Has, thousands of 5-star reviews at this point. You've got number one apps in the Apple Marketplace for a long time. You've got New York Times bestselling books. You are an accomplished musician, which is bananas to me. I want to talk about all that stuff, and I want to talk about the business side of things as well. But let's start with some health stuff, because lots of entrepreneurs blame their busyness for being fat. What advice do you have for them?
You're underperforming. If you're fat, your brain is not working as well as it could be. So there's kind of a tendency to think that people who are in shape or carrying extra muscle or whatever it is are meatheads. And an element of that can be true. But when you actually look at the research, people who tend to work out on a regular basis, their neurological system just works better. Everything's firing faster. It's more connected. You've drained out most of the toxins because whenever you're doing some sort of exercise, you're cycling all of your blood, lymph, all this stuff needs to happen. So there are different ways to go about it. I mean, you can do the cold plunge sauna thing if you really hate exercise. But for the most part, most people, if they want to live for a long time, perform really well. You don't have to do much more than walking most days. Just do a lot of walking. If you look at long-lived people across the world, a lot of them are not like hitting the iron in the gym, or like doing advanced things. They're just like walking to work or carrying baskets on their heads, walking up hills into their 90s. Like this is stuff that we're designed to do. And I think we overcomplicate things. Also, another part of the problem is like in our society, we're rewarded for busyness and kind of this hypervigilance, overproduction, rat racy type behavior. We're rewarded in monetary terms, in terms of status, in terms of, being there and being available for your employees, your partners, your clients, whatever that is. And so that leads people to dangerous places because if you lose your health, then everything else falls apart pretty quickly.
Yeah, what's the adage of
health is wealth?
Yeah, no, it's like I can't remember what it is. If you have 1,000 goals, or if you have your health, you can have 1,000 things that are important to you. But if you don't, only one thing is important to you.
Right.
Some shit like that.
Yeah. And that's true. It's like, I think about that whenever I get a sore throat or something like that. And it's the only thing I can feel. It's the only, I can't fall asleep.
Or like your toe hurts.
Yeah, your toe hurts.
Right. Your little toe.
I'm not thankful for my toes right now. I should be just like in immense gratitude for all the things that are working. But that's not how our brains or our emotions work at all. We focus on the stuff that's out of whack. And also we have big blind spots, too, especially as entrepreneurs. And so it's important to recognize that we're rewarded for short-term things, but this is a long game. You got to play that long game. And that definitely includes taking care of your health.
Yeah, I think, there's this other adage of life is short. And I think can feel that way, especially as you get older. But the reality is it's very long.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, right? If you make a bad mistake, you realize how long it is.
Yes.
You mentioned that exercising and being in good shape increases cognitive performance. I feel like there's a point of diminishing return there.
Oh, yeah.
And my experience in doing endurance athletics is that there are days when you're pushing well past your baseline because that's how you increase your distance.
Yep.
And I am now acutely aware of I could keep going, but the rest of the day is going to suck if I do this.
Yeah.
And I do not get clarity. I get fog.
And the following day also might be trashed, right? Depending on how far you push that.
So do you have a mechanism or rule or kind of metric for that? Can you push, let's talk in cardio world, or I guess it could be any type of exercise, but do you push 5% past your baseline? Do you stay at your baseline? How do you grow? and also maintain cognitive performance?
Yeah, well, that's an awesome question because there are so many different factors to consider, and it's all around like what are your, let's say, the goals of the season, right? Because if you want to stay in top marathon running shape, like you don't want to stay in that shape forever. Like that's going to burn you out and not ultimately be good for you. Whereas if you focus on that for a season or half the year or something like that, then you can trend toward training and performance that you're looking for. You don't want to peak too early, right? You don't want to peak too late. You don't want to get injured. So especially as we get a little more advanced with age, like in your 20s, maybe you can get away with just pushing it and going harder. But, as you reach your 30s and your 40s, especially for go-getters like us, the tendency is to, like, we usually win by pushing harder and pushing through pain,
right?
By being in that uncomfortable state. But there's another side of training, which is trying to be as comfortable as possible while you're training. So kind of like zone true. If you're thinking about the zones, it would be zone 2, where you're keeping your heart rate relatively low. You're able to, the way that I measure it without devices generally is, can you breathe through your nose and maintain your pace? And trying to build up the capacity of that, I could do this all day pace without redlining it. Building up that capacity takes a lot of time. And that's kind of like the fat burning zone or whatever. And that's not exactly right. But the more that you can spend time in that zone, the more likely you are to get benefit without stressing your system and getting into that highly parasympathetic state where you're just running on stress hormones and burning yourself out. So like the challenge becomes, do I run a 10 miler today when I was scheduled for 15 or 20? When I turned 40, I re-examined my goals and I'm like, what exactly am I doing here? Yeah. Because carrying more muscle becomes problematic, right? Like your joints can give out if you're too top heavy and you want to continue endurance training. So this is a long-winded answer to your question, but it's based around where you want to peak and when. And so you want to be really careful.
Relative to a given event, not relative to your life.
Well, what's the difference, right? At some point, it doesn't have to be an event. It could be like, if you want to be in the best shape possible by this date, it could be around a race. It could be around just like a personal goal. For a lot of women, it's a wedding or like an anniversary.
Sorry, I meant more in terms of like the entire arc of your life. When do you want to peak in the entire arc of your life, right? But you're talking about a given time phase of your life, right? Yeah. I'm training for something. I want to get in shape for something, et cetera. Yeah, I think that, I like that. And I think that's life, thinking about the trade-offs, right? It's not, I fundamentally, and I say this often, but I fundamentally don't believe in right or wrong or good or bad. I believe those are relative constructs to an outcome that you might be after. Yeah. Right. And so you look at, is running 15 miles healthy? Is running 30 miles good for you? And the answer is it's good if I'm training for a 50-mile ultra, right? Or a 100-mile ultra. And it's probably not good if I'm doing it every day and that's my mechanism for exercise. Yeah, probably.
So if you're trashed, whether you feel that way before you lace up your shoes or you hit the gym that day, like it's important to check in. And on the days when your body is just not ready for that, you shouldn't push it because that's when you get injured. That's when things happen that are regrettable. For the most part, if you target those days when you're really feeling good and swing for the fences, go for that PR, like do that. But ultimately, if you look at the pro athletes, for example, who do really well later in their careers, it's not because they're getting stronger or faster. In fact, the opposite is happening. It's because they're recovering better. They realize that the older you get, the harder it is to recover, and the longer it takes, the more you have to do. And also, you aren't rewarded as much for pushing it to that ultimate level. You can't get away with that anymore. So you need to be smarter about it. Ultimately, I think if you want to simplify everything, it's really prioritizing sleep. If you can prioritize sleep, and it's a really boring answer, but if you can do that, then you're doing exactly what all the top performing athletes and performers and actors and everyone else is doing. It's not that you have private chefs or like all this biohacking gear. It's really that you're dialed in and you have a routine that's such that, when you show up, the automatic thing that you do is the right thing.
So speaking of routines that involve lots of sleep, do you think that Brian Johnson's crazy?
I don't think he's crazy for the sleep part. I love that he talks about that and prioritizes it. But having blood boys, I think, is ethically and morally a little gray area at best. It's certainly like some of his. So the way that I think about it is the internet started off, especially early in the blogosphere and stuff like that, kind of like a library. And now it's like a circus. It's just absolutely insane. And all these hysterics. And, you know, having hung out with Brian a few times in person, the on-camera version is often different than like the real life version. And I enjoyed being with Brian and kind of like asking him a few questions in person. He's very thoughtful. But I think a lot of the marketing spin and the videos that come out and the clips or whatever, and some of the stuff that he says is doing what it's meant to do, which is just kind of get people riled up and talking about. One thing that's wild to me, though, is that I was like the young guy when we started, and a lot of other folks had been doing it for a while, whether they were authors or writers, scientists, that sort of thing. So now they've been doing it for, 30 years, some of them, with deep expertise in longevity. What used to be called quantified self is now kind of called biohacking, but, real scientists and people who know what they're talking about. Whereas the biohacking world and kind of like the internet celebrity world is driven by people who have a lot of hype and a lot of attention right now. Yeah. And like this dude, Brian Johnson, for example, was crushing it in business for many years.
Sold his business in payments. So he built Braintree and sold it to PayPal, which is my world, right? Yeah. So I've known of him for a long time because I respect him for building that.
Sure.
But he then went on his own personal health journey, and it's really only been the last 2 years where he's hyperbolized biohacking.
Well, and that's the thing. So it's like he was a business guy neglecting his health for the vast majority of his entire life. And that's his expertise. And the tendency is, especially for smart, driven people with resources, is to say, like, I'm an expert here, so I've got to be an expert here. I must be the smartest person in the world or the healthiest person in the world. Or like that sort of hype is a little bit ridiculous to me. Having interviewed, hundreds of people who are true experts who have been doing this for decades, it's kind of shocking to see how like the entire world turns its head toward one person who's been doing it for like 2 years or 4 years and says that they're the best. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, he's got a good marketing spin for sure.
He does. And ultimately, I hope that this is all for good and encourages people to sleep more and do the simple things. But I definitely disagree with him about certain pieces, whether it's the vegan plant-based piece or the, ultimately transhumanist agenda and AI and integrating that into the human body. Like I am very much a Luddite as far as it goes to that, or very conservative on the end of like, I don't think we should be jacking into the matrix anytime soon.
Well, let's talk about the diet side of things. So the wild diet did wildly well. Carnivore, vegetarian, pescatarian, eat fat, don't eat fat, have dairy, don't have dairy. What's the right diet?
All of it. It's all right. It's all wrong. It's the thing is, these conversations have been going on for a lot longer than people realize. Mm-hmm. So when I was writing the wild diet, I was looking into, well, how long have been people talking about like low carb or eating mostly meats or eating mostly vegetables? And it's like people have been having this exact argument for well over 100 years, longer than that. You look at different religions and things like that, and you're supposed to eat this meat, but not that meat. And in certain countries, it's like not really spiritually acceptable to eat certain meats or animals, while other ones are, including rodents or bugs, are totally on the menu. And so,
weird.
As far as humans go, I think it's most important to subtract the stuff that is obviously killing us right now, which is the newfangled processed foods. The shockingly low quality of food in America is something that like you don't really realize as an American until you leave America. Right? Like a lot of people go to Europe for the first time.
Oh my God.
Or South America. And it's
or
like
Australia.
You're eating like a pig and you're eating all these baked goods and these sourdough breads and drinking beer and whatever it is. And you're losing weight, like getting healthier as you do. The reason for that is our toxic burden here in America is just absolutely off the charts. And the standards that we have for our food are so low compared to other countries that we can't even export the same version of our drinks, packaged food, snacks and chips to other countries because these second and third world countries have higher standards than we do for our food. So it's important to recognize that you have to put your shields up and really redefine your relationship with what it's like to eat food in the modern world.
As an entrepreneur who is busy as hell and finding themselves in a place where they're rationalizing eating bullshit
Yeah.
What are the easiest ways to adjust your diet without going like full board? I'm going to count my macros and have a chef, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I say just prioritize protein, high quality, clean proteins. And some people do well with like whey and dairy based proteins. I do, whereas people who are more sensitive to dairy, which is a large portion of the population, collagen is a great option, but mostly just going after real proteins, meats. If you can eat meats most of the day until you're full, with some smattering of fresh veggies that are hopefully local and seasonal, same thing with fruits, and a palm-sized portion of carbs like white rice or sweet potatoes, things like that, combined with training, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. You can get away with eating a little bit of junk here and there, but I would encourage everyone to just have very, very high standards for what you eat. Maybe not at first, but after a while, like going to a restaurant, instead of getting like the big burrito or the fried stuff at the Mexican place, you get a big ass steak with some delicious fajita vegetables that are all sauteed up together. And it's hard to complain about that after a while. You might still prefer the fried stuff and all of the chips and that stuff for a while. But as soon as you get away from it, your tastes start to become more sensitized to like natural, the flavors that would come from the natural world, from an actual vegetable or from an actual good, well-cooked piece of meat. You know, it's like if your sensitivity is high enough, the right foods are going to start tasting really good. And conversely, when you go by McDonald's or you just walk by, you get that waft of the smell. It's like, wow, that smells like rancid oils now. You know, like you start to appreciate that the stuff that we're eating is industrial gear oil. Like it's not the vast majority of the oils that we eat in this country weren't meant to be food. And that is startling and terrifying and disgusting. And I think it hopefully is on its way toward change. At least we've been talking about this vegetable oil stuff for a long, long time. But now people are really starting to pay attention, hopefully make some changes. But
yeah, well, I just sent Sean Kelly to my buddy Jack's restaurant in town, The Well.
Nice. Oh, The Well is awesome.
The Well's awesome. And all of their properties now, most of their properties now are no seed oil.
Yeah.
And local, I think they're on organic, no sugar, like pretty high bar. And you know what's funny is it's not a high bar.
Yeah.
But it's a high bar from a profitability perspective because it's so cheap to buy all of the trash from Cisco or even higher end suppliers.
Right.
And it's more expensive to go and make an effort to do the rest of the stuff.
What's interesting though is that like sometimes the most expensive restaurants are still getting everything from
Absolutely.
Cisco. Like that's par for the course. And so especially if you're the type of person who's an entrepreneur or whatever, and you're trying to prioritize your health, for example, like go to the nice fancy restaurants that actually have clean food because those exist too.
Yeah.
Like,
more and more now.
Yeah, more and more. And even, I don't want to say a step below that, but a step below that in cost and affordability are places like Modern Market or, True Food Kitchen. There are a few others, and there are some that are kind of like fast casual where you don't even have to sit down and
Flower Child.
Yeah. And some of those do still have some level of seed oils, but I think they're all talking about it now and at least like trying to work through some better option. Cause I don't know what it is, but it's a small fraction of the cost to use a crap oil compared to using the ones that we would traditionally use. But for the most part, that's because of the wrong sorts of incentives in our system, the subsidies that support corn and soy and GMOs and all this nonsense. We're paying for it with our dollars, and we're paying for it on the other end with our health and our medical bills. And so like that just needs to stop.
Yeah. How do you feel about Bobby Kennedy?
I'm very encouraged by the fact that he's a part of the equation now, and I hope it's not some type of a ploy just to get more votes and then it's a lame duck type deal. The reason I don't think, hopefully that's going to happen is because, just this weekend I was at an event with Del Bigtree and Callie Means and Mark Hyman and a bunch of other people who are in town talking about how to make all of this better. And also to some degree, pretty deeply involved with Kennedy's work. And so I respect a lot of the conversations that are happening. I'm really encouraged by the fact that they're finally happening because these are the exact things that I was being censored and shadow banned for, and as was everyone else who was talking about it just a few years ago. And so that change gives a lot of courage to the people to really come out there and just speak truth and say, we deserve better. The next generation deserves better. Where are we going as a country? Like it doesn't have to be circling the drain. Like there are a lot of things to be optimistic about. The fact that technology is at the place where it is, like if we use it for a pro-human cause, as opposed to just like trying to eliminate humans and kind of get the better of them in some way, I think that the future can be very bright. And at the very least, someone like Bobby talking about the issues like dyes in foods, the poor quality vegetable oils, the sorry state of the pharmaceutical and medical industry, and the backwards incentives, like at least the conversation is happening. And so hopefully enough people hear that, listen to it honestly, take everything with a grain of salt, but like consider this, like, do we deserve better, or is this the direction that we all want to be going in?
Yeah, that's how I feel about everything right now. Like the entire administration, everything going on. And, you know, you've got a more divided, you have some polarized shit happening. Mm-hmm. But in general, I look at the whole thing and think, do we want a better quality of food? Do we want a better budget? Do we want better? Do we just want a better system? There is no question that across the board, we have all sorts of crazy chaos that has found its way into government. And as a result, has found its way into our lives that we cannot get around, or we have a very difficult time getting around.
Right.
And quality of food is one of them.
It is.
Last question on food, because I want to talk about business stuff with you and the rest of your life, because you've got a pretty like bizarre path in life.
Yes.
And I mean, in a lot of ways. So I want to talk about a couple different areas of this, but lab grown meat, is it the devil?
My question is just like, why? You know, do we really is this the future that we want? Once again, it's like they've trotted out these things from year to year. It's just like, well, we should be eating cricket protein. So like eat your bug bars. That one didn't take.
No, it did not.
The bleeding fake meats made out of like non-heme iron, like this bizarre soy-based stuff, Beyond Burgers, Impossible, all that flopped spectacularly as well.
Have they? I mean, they're around now.
I mean, they're around, but
they didn't catch the way they thought they would.
It seemed like it was going to take over the world a few years ago, and I think they thought it was, and we're putting a lot of money behind that. Now that they see that it's not really catching on, or at least those fake meats aren't catching on. Because I think, you know, if you want to go plant-based, a lot of people can have success doing that and trying it out for a while. I am a fan of elimination diets on both sides of that. Try carnivore, try going plant-based. But what you don't need to do is eat all this fake meat crap that they're trying to sell you. Because the advantages of going plant-based for most people are the fact that they're eating salads and locally and real foods, not that you're prioritizing this crap. So same thing with lab-grown meat. It's like the future that I want to see is more regenerative agriculture, where there are cows out on pasture and chickens running around. They're fertilizing and they're, you know, putting their hooves into the dirt, and there's a healthy soil beneath them. And the water that comes from the sky and the sunshine that's coming from the sky is the natural energy source that supports a lot of this, compared to taking all this out of nature and then doing it in artificial light with artificial man-made ingredients and all that. It's like, I could see how that would be more profitable, but why don't we find a way to make the natural system more economical for everyone? Because there is a way to do that. You go to other countries, and it's not just because of the strength of the dollar, but sometimes by virtue of the fact that it's easier in that ecosystem to have grass-fed beef, because you can't afford to feed them soy or corn or that sort of thing. So you find that the chickens or the beef in certain countries are much higher quality and much lower cost than in the U.S. So I think that there are ways to go about all of this, and we need to get rid of all of the junk and the bloat and the backwards incentives in the top-down system right now, and do what we can to, at a local level or at a grassroots level, like meet your local farmer if you can, and try to join, community supported agriculture and that sort of thing, CSA farms, and buying your food locally supports your local economy. It's better for you. If you want to look at it kind of from the quantum side, some people talk about eating certain foods, and I agree with this, gives your body information about where you are and what time it is. And this all can help align your circadian biology, or it can throw it out of whack.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that.
Yeah.
So eating locally has something to do with aligning you to the time zone that you're in?
Yes.
Interesting. So like if you're doing, I frequently refer to myself as a terrible time traveler. It takes me so long to fucking adjust when I switch time zones.
Me too.
And you think that making a point of eating the local food there would help with that?
Definitely.
Oh, interesting.
So when I went to Peru many years ago for the first time, they were handing out coca leaves and coca tea, not cocaine, just the leaf, which is like a very mild tea. And they were saying, drink this because it will help you with the altitude. We were at like 11, 12,000 feet, and it's pretty rough up there if you're not like ready for that sort of altitude experience.
Yeah. What city is that on the way to?
Like the Sacred Valley, Cusco.
Cusco.
That area.
Cusco, like you fly into Lima and then you go to Cusco and then you take the train to Machu Picchu.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And Cusco, I think, is at 11,000.
Right. And or somewhere around there. And so I found that having just, a cup of tea, usually once a day, helped enormously. And I was, there are different reasons why that could be, but one that I suspected was like, okay, my body is, if everything is information, it's digesting this, it's kind of taking the nutrients. My brain and my body is also processing this in a certain way. And every cell takes in information, digests that and processes it, turns it into something else. And so having something that was grown with the DNA that's been there for thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years of these different plants and animal foods tells your body, you're at 11,000 feet, make these adjustments and that sort of thing. So a lot of this can sound woo, but even if it's not true, I would choose to believe it if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It does make sense. I quote our buddy Jesse all the time. He told me years ago, it's more important that a belief serves you than that it's true.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
It is. And I have a hard time getting myself to believe things that seem too woo or that are ridiculous in my head.
Right.
But it's an interesting construct. I like it. So, all right, I got to ask you about kind of origins of business here because I rattled through the stuff when we started, but you wrote some books that did very well. You have had a podcast forever that's done very well. You launched an app that did very well right out of the gates. What is business for you? How do you make money? And how did that start?
Yeah, I've made money in all sorts of different ways. But the way that it started was really with music. And so I was a teenager in the late 90s, and the internet was kind of just taking off, but specifically audio on the internet. We just started to have the bandwidth where you could stream audio. And so for me, I was obsessed with music at a young age and put together various recordings, just playing all the instruments and singing. Most of it was absolutely terrible. But a few of the things that I uploaded, people started listening to. And I started, it was called mp3.com back then, but I started uploading my songs and people would buy the album or they'd download the track for a certain amount of money. But mostly they would just listen to the stream, which was ad supported. And this is in like 1998, 1999.
Damn.
And I was, 15, 16 years old, whatever, making thousands of dollars from this, from selling songs, writing songs, streaming songs. And then, with the .com bubble, when that all imploded, it got bought out by CNET, I think, and they basically shut that down. And the music industry ultimately changed forever after that. But I did see the proof of concept of like, if you can build a website or you can go on a platform and create something that people engage with, you can actually build a business.
Damn.
And so
what a crazy time to get that data point.
Yeah, it was
like 15 years old with the initial .com. When the initial .com wave, I was 18 in 98.
Okay.
And that initial wave, I remember talking to, at the time I was selling door to door. And so I was in people's houses all the time, talking to random people.
Wow.
It was bizarre, but I'm selling to these people. And I remember talking to people that were involved periodically in internet startups.
Yeah.
But I just did not get it at all because I had no data point. I had no reference for this being anything other than like something that was going on.
Yeah.
That people were talking about on the news or whatever, the internet.
Right.
But I didn't have any other anchor to it. So you found this early and you got proof of concept immediately to say, oh, I can sell shit online.
Yeah.
Where did you take it from there?
Then I started playing with eBay, and mostly that was just a way for me to get better instruments, like musical instruments back then. And so I would try to buy these things that I noticed that a lot of the stuff was overpriced. Some of it was underpriced because it wasn't listed well. So like it didn't have a good description. They didn't have a good camera and photos. They didn't put the time and effort into it. So I would buy these old guitars or pieces of equipment and basically just take better pictures, do a nice description, even if it was broken or whatever. I would say, like, this is what's broken and here's, a potential solution, whatever it was. And so, once more at 16 or 17, I started doing that with musical instruments and then some computer gear and stuff. And that didn't turn into like a ton of money, but it certainly out earned between music and doing a little bit of that, any sort of work study program that they wanted me to be on in college, for example, where I just have to, even though I'm going to an Ivy League school, paying a fortune to be there and going into debt, whatever, I'd have to be sitting at a desk making $15 an hour at the library or something, 4 hours a day. Doesn't make any sense. So I was doing these other things on the side and playing a bunch of music and mostly using the internet to reach people. And so even back then, I was starting up a newsletter that was basically a direct marketing response. It was around music. But the mechanics are absolutely the same as what happened later when I transitioned into health after working in consulting after college. I started writing about health in the blogosphere, and that caught on early on RSS. And so I had, I think, like 40,000 RSS subscribers early in the time that I was writing my blog. And that got enough critical mass where I kind of burned myself out playing too many live shows as a musician. And I wondered about the whole podcasting thing. A few people are just like, hey, you're a musician. Why don't you start a podcast? I'm like, what is a podcast? This is back in 2009, 2010. And we were already live streaming our shows, believe it or not, back then. I remember from Austin, like live streaming from the roof deck. And so like a lot of this technology was already kind of there, but it wasn't being used yet.
It wasn't good either.
It wasn't great.
It wasn't good and it wasn't accessible. Right?
Yes.
So it wasn't like you had to know what you were doing.
Yeah.
Sort of similar to the evolution of websites. You originally had to know how to write HTML. Mm-hmm. And then you also had to know how to host things. And you had to know how to interact with like cPanel or WHM or whatever it was, right? You had to know kind of the tech stack to do it.
Right.
And probably similar to live streaming, you couldn't just go to an app and press go live.
It wasn't that simple back then. And I liked the fact that a lot of this stuff wasn't simple. It's like a lot of my background was in essentially audio engineering, especially around like recording and the music industry.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you also go through high school and college really quickly?
Yeah.
So you went through high school and college in like 6 years.
Yeah. I finished high school in 3 years, and then I did basically finish the undergrad in 3 years. And then the last year I did at Dartmouth was a fellowship where I worked with professors on like interdisciplinary technology and mostly around how music can change and affect culture, and explored how that's happened over history.
Motherfucker. Okay, we're gonna get to that part, but I asked because I was gonna ask you what it was that was different about you that led you to dig in to the point where you're figuring out how to live stream music before the internet really exists. But it seems like you've got sort of the curiosity to drive quickly anyway.
Yeah.
If you're the person that's pushing through school at an accelerated pace, you have interest and intrigue in a way that fosters curiosity.
That's actually largely the reason that I skipped a grade my freshman year of high school. Is like I was there with a teacher in English class, and I like was correcting some of the stuff that he was writing on the board. And like after a few classes, like he sat down with me. He's like, "You're so curious. You're so smart. Like you don't belong here. Like let's get this going." And I felt the same way. He was
like, "I hate you. You keep correcting me. Get the fuck out of my class."
But I mean, I cared about writing more than he did, which makes sense. I did ultimately work with a teacher who loves writing and continues to be an incredible professor to this day and a good friend of mine. But like, it was that curiosity that has always been the driver for me more than the rewards or than the achievements. Which a lot of times to my own detriment. Like I will lose interest in something that is going really well because I just don't want to maintain it. I feel like I've already learned the thing that we were there to do, and maybe made a splash as well. So I think a large part of my career is kind of a vertical or an industry hopper is driven by a desire to learn and that curiosity. And as soon as it feels like it's gone on a little bit too long, I'm pretty ready to explore a whole other universe, because this interdisciplinary connection between different verticals or different industries is what really fascinates me. It's like, can you apply the world of fitness and training and nutrition and health and biohacking to the world of music, or vice versa? Like, how is the world of training and getting better at a skill or a craft, a musical instrument, different from being the fastest sprinter on earth? There are a lot of similarities. So when you can take some expert from one field and bring them over to the other, man, you can learn so much. And I don't try to be the expert that way, but more the generalist that's hopping from one to the other and seeing those things that are similar.
Okay, this is the interruption where I'm supposed to take money and let somebody else advertise on the podcast, but I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to remind you that I also own easypaydirect.com. And if you're a business that's accepting credit cards or needs to, beyond the fact that we can do a rate review to save you money, beyond the fact that we give you dedicated account reps, world-class customer service, world-class technology, and can actually optimize the way you accept payments online, you should understand why we have thousands of people a year come to us off of platforms like Stripe or PayPal and why they prefer Easy Pay Direct. You can check us out at epd.com/BAM. That's epd.com/BAM. And you mentioned this, sometimes it bites you. Do you feel like you are compromising the opportunity to be an expert when you lose interest?
Not necessarily, because like, oddly enough, for me, the whole health side of things has always been a passion. It's not my specialty. It's not, I mean, my undergrad was around psychology and brain science and that sort of thing, not touching nutrition or health or fitness really at all.
I suppose it's also a never ending well. Like, you're never really going to know, like you said, relative to diet, there isn't really a right answer. We don't really know.
Yeah.
And there's always new stuff coming out.
Yeah. And there's a tendency as well to think that the new stuff is better or more true than the stuff that's come out before. And that is just not how it works, unfortunately, in our current system and the way that research is funded and all that. So I know how to read the research and have done a lot of research heavy projects, but the longer the time goes on, the more I realize it's about the fundamentals, and it's about mostly putting those fundamentals into action. Whether we're talking about training in sport or in some other area of life, it's much more simple than people make it out to be. And it's not usually an information problem, especially not anymore.
When you talk about how different areas of life intersect or how different concepts work together, you mentioned music working with other areas of life. So you started in music. At what point did you dive into sort of the biological involvement of music and not just you playing music?
In college, a lot of the research that I did was looking into what happens to the brain when you engage in musical training, and if there are any differences between the brains or the way that the brains work of trained musicians compared to just people who are untrained, musically speaking, from a playing perspective. And what the research showed was really interesting, because these crossover skills that you can build through training they apply mostly to the world of language. And the question that I was trying to answer when I looked into this is just like, I don't know why I like music. I don't know why I play it all the time. It doesn't make sense to me that like you walk into an elevator or the shopping mall and you hear music. People are in their cars listening to music. They're walking down the street. Like, people are listening to music all the time, but why? Compared to, if you look at evolution or the evolutionary reason that we would do something like eat or procreate, makes total sense. Music doesn't. It's a complete waste of time. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so in trying to answer that question, I'm like, well, where does music come from and what benefit does it give to us, whether it's listening to it or creating it? And it basically lights up the whole brain, right? So when you're playing music especially, not always, but you can reach a state of flow, like a basketball player or skier or someone who's just operating at an elite level. And you need to stay completely present. And so you're almost building, if you think of your brain like a computer, you're building capacity in RAM. Like, you have processing power that you can use immediately that allows you to listen to not only musical sounds and be able to hear not just like the big mess of music, but you can pick out, oh, that's a trumpet, and that's probably a major scale, or that's Mixolydian, or you don't have to label it, but you can hear it. You can go in there and pick it out, as opposed to just, hearing the whole wall of music as one thing.
Yeah, I think also as you dig into playing music or producing music, which I've had huge chunks of my life where I'm involved in different capacities and never gone as deep as I think I've wanted to. But as you get deeper into playing or producing, those elements show up and you hear them and you understand them.
Yeah.
And so whether it's the rhythm or the actual instruments or the tempo, or you start to isolate elements and you hear an element and you can track an element, right? So great music producers know when to use what cymbal, right?
Yeah.
Or what drum, or even what drum kick.
Yeah.
And they can modify the noise and identify, oh, it would sound better if this happened.
Right.
But that happens in deep expertise. And good musicians play all day, every day. And it's fucking crazy to me. Like I look at these lifelong bands that are like, they've been going for decades.
Yeah.
Or, just we'll leave it at that. But people that have been going for decades and they play, and it's a physical activity, and they've been doing it for 8 hours a day for 50 years. Why does that happen?
It's an excellent question, but I'll say this. Music is a primitive version of language to our brain. So it engages the emotions and even some of our thoughts and the way that we think about things in the absence of understanding vocabulary or words that are being spoken. So there's one of the skills that I found that musicians have that's much more developed than non-trained musicians is what's called speech prosody. It's the ability to process the emotional content of what's being said in the absence of words. Basically, you can understand someone's point, where they're coming from, their physical state, their emotional state, much better than people who are non-trained. Conversely, you could also potentially, and this is theoretical now because that wasn't in the research, but I'm thinking you can also communicate with your voice better because you're using it as an instrument with those different, where to put the cymbals or the pauses in the rhythm. So when you look at music, you're thinking about melody, you're thinking about pitch, timbre, and rhythm. Speech is exactly the same thing. And so like for me, I'm primarily a guitarist and I play lead guitar and solos. And I started off on doing like saxophone solos. And, a lot of people might think that you're just going up there and shredding notes or like playing whatever. But what you're actually trying to do is tell a story. And you start off by introducing an idea and you build up the energy, usually in the middle. And then you like end it off with some sort of handoff to whatever's happening next. It's much more strategic, even though it might not be explicitly conscious. This is like a storytelling skill that's being developed over time. And if you get good at doing that in one area, then you can absolutely apply that to another. And so I think that things like musical training, not just musical training, but things like musical training actually increase your ability to be present in the moment and to do things like podcasts or just have a good conversation. So a lot of people who think that they're tone deaf or have no hope of being a musician are kind of missing the point, because I'm not great at doing visual art, but I try to sometimes. And one of my best friends is an incredible artist and has been for many, many decades, and just one of the top in the world really with his skills. But what I realized when he had me do a few exercises and looking at the way that he goes through the world is his training is allowing him not to paint better or draw better. It's not really about the mechanical skills of that. He can see better. He can see the perfect color that needs to be there before it's there and then put it there. Like he sees it in his mind. He sees the colors in the world to a degree that I'm just, seeing this much and he's seeing this much. Similarly, as when I hear music or trained musicians listen to music, they can hear all the little stuff and pick it out and maybe recreate it and play it again. So that's what we're trying to do with these different skills in life, I think. So being good at a sport, being good at a game, and music, art, these sorts of things that are being kicked out of schools and colleges right now, we need to double down on it in our own personal lives. Even if you think you suck at it, that's not the point. Like it's part of being human. Dancing too, and I need to take my own advice because that's not something I do on the rig.
Me either. That's a fascinating parallel to draw. I frequently, I live through the lens of alignment instead of balance.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like balance is a mechanism to escape something you don't like enough.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people live in business in this way where we as a culture are told that we're supposed to take breaks from work, right? And I don't like that idea fundamentally, because I feel like if I'm into something enough, I shouldn't have to take a break from it. I should be excited about doing it. And there's this other camp of people that feel like they get in a flow state, and then, it's the adage of, if you like something enough, you'll never have to work another day in your life. It's that idea. And that idea to me is alignment, right? Versus balance. But this construct is that these other activities, which don't seem like they're working, that they are work at all, are in fact an exercise mechanism for the rest of your life and for work.
Yeah. So because I'd been writing songs since I was 10 or something like that, and writing poems and using words to tell little stories in each sentence, or just make it succinct and communicate ideas. By the time I went around to writing books, like, they were pretty good, like right out of the gate, because I'd put in whatever amount of hours you need to put in before that to develop those skills. I was coming at it with a higher degree of practice and training, and a whole different way of thinking about words than a lot of the other people. When I came into the workplace and we were writing proposals for private sector clients or the government, I was just pumping them out really, really quickly, because I knew how to communicate in words ideas and complex things. I remember sitting down when we were all like interviewing for the job, and they put us all in a room, and it was super dystopian, right? Like, we're all around the table being tested, and they're just like, take all this information and put it into an email. And, they gave us something like 45 minutes or whatever. And I was done after like 10 or 15. Everyone else is just like working. I'm like, did I miss something? Like, what is wrong here? But I think that the real answer is that I'd been obsessing over this for a long time. And at this point, it had kind of come naturally. So I think for a lot of people, to go back to your point about like taking breaks or not feeling like you're working, I agree with that. But I've also been in the situation where no matter what I'm doing, no matter how passionate of a project it is, or whatever, or how much I was into it, I can turn it into work. It'll become work if I'm not careful. And the way that I mitigate that is usually just by taking a break physically, like going to a different location on vacation, working from somewhere else, working from the road or whatever. And once I get out of my little thing, maybe once a month or certainly like once a quarter, like go and take a trip like that, spend some time away from your phone, away from your normal activities. And then you can fall back in love with whatever you're doing, because you can get away from the minutia, subtract the stuff that needs to go. Because when you're too into it, or at least when I'm too into it, I find myself getting too caught up in some of the lower level tasks that I think are now important. I go away for a while and it's like, I don't know, let's get rid of that and completely pivot here, because that's what's going to be effective now.
Yeah. I think that I'm sort of on this constant pursuit to find structures and frameworks that tell me how to do things in a black and white manner.
Yeah.
This is the right way to do it, or like, this is the most productive way to do it, and this is a less productive way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also generally believe that having any framework to follow is better than having the best framework to follow.
Yeah.
Because you have a structure.
Right.
I also believe that the music is in the empty space, so to speak. And there's stuff to learn there and stuff to hear there. I guess my question is, do you think about those activities like music or writing or dancing as productive, deliberately productive things in the name of business, or vice versa? Or do they just work together?
That is a difficult question to answer directly, just because it's a big sloppy mess of like, where are you squeezing money from? And so the way that I like to think about it is, there are certain activities and projects that are worth pursuing and can either pay for themselves or generate income. But most projects, for me anyway, that draw my interest are not like that. They're also different ways that you can go about things. Like for the most part, writers are broke, right?
Mhm.
Authors don't do well. But, and I've done it both ways. I've done kind of like books of poetry and satire, a deeply scientific book, as well as a more commercial health-based book. Building it to be commercial, it's like I got a huge advance. The book did really, really well. It was a huge income source for a while there. But I didn't want to keep doing that, to stay on the train of like a New York Times bestselling author.
Mhm.
Most people wind up publishing books every 1 to 2 years that they're not writing, that are rehashing the same stuff that they said in the first one. It's kind of like the same thing that happens with movies, where it just gets worse and worse. People keep buying it for a while, but then it like dilutes the whole thing and the message is lost. I don't want to be a part of the problem. And also, I don't want to work with idiots. And I found that, and I don't mean to disparage anyone in particular, but, working with some of these large companies, like I was on an ABC TV show, as well as worked with Penguin Random House on a book. And it's like, I was expecting working with, these big names or whatever to be working with some of the best, smartest people out there who were really on point, doing great work, delivering on their promises, staying on their deadline. And when that wasn't true, and when there was a lot of just amateur hour going on, like I don't have tolerance for that. I would rather work with nobody than work with like a team of a few slackers and a few people who just need to say something to be heard that day. This other person who wants a meeting. Like I got out of the strategy consulting world for that precise reason. Like I don't want to be in that room. That leads my wife. We've been together now for more than 14 years, married for more than 10, and been working together for pretty much the whole time. And so it's important for us to stay aligned on like, do we still like this or not? Like, is it working?
Each other or the business?
Well, both, right? There could be some overlap there if you push it too hard in the wrong direction. But for the most part, we've managed that really well. But that means taking a step back and really cutting off the projects that just aren't drawing that magical energy or not generative from a financial or an energetic standpoint. So that's more how I think about it. Like some things will generate financial resources, right? Other things will you'll kind of generate a more spiritual energy that drives you. Like, so when I wake up in the morning, generally I'll prioritize my most important tasks. Like, why am I here on earth? How can I use my skills to contribute in a way that feels right? And a lot of times that's practicing new songs, writing new songs, playing music for an hour or two before I ever check my phone or do any other sort of work. Sometimes if I'm writing a new book and that's like my main priority, I'll wake up and I'll write for a couple hours, most days. But for the most part, all these projects like don't start off with a good financial plan. I'm in that position now because I worked really, really hard early in the career when the podcast was taking off, especially in 2012, 2013, 2014, having one of the top podcasts in the world of health and beyond, like in multiple countries. Back then, things were mostly in the Apple ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Recognizing that, I thought, well, how can I leverage this into another kind of business or another project? So started developing apps. And because most of the listeners to podcasts back then already used Apple devices, they had extra money to spend on apps that like didn't really exist in the Android marketplace or anything back then. And
I don't think there even was an Android marketplace back then.
I don't think there was.
I mean, I can't remember when Android launched. We'll have to find it and throw it in the show notes. But certainly, iPhone launched in 2007, right? So it was at least a few years before Android jumped in.
And even in terms of like mostly, even if you technically could sell an app for Androids back then, there wasn't an interest in doing so until it had like some level of market share. And it took a long time for them to catch up. But ultimately, we did develop for Android as well. And so having the knowledge that these are kind of like early adopters in the world of podcasting, listening to podcasts, in the world of health, like these people are kind of early. They have more disposable income than the general population. Let's kind of tailor premium apps for them that recreate challenges or cookbooks, some sort of interactivity that can also drive traffic back to the podcast within this ecosystem of Apple. And so that we published some of our own apps, and then we published apps for other people and kind of started our own agency around that. And published, I think it was 5 or 6 number one food and drink apps in a row, just like bam, 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 because we knew how to do it and kind of have a launch strategy that's not super complicated, but you've got to do the work. And if you do it right, and you basically, we have a 4-page or so just checklist of things for launches that we do for books, for apps, for other projects. And if you go through and you do most of these things well, then you have a really good chance, if you combine that with your platform or a partner's platform, to make a big splash in the marketplace.
Okay, so how do you make money was, I think, where we started.
Yeah. Don't lose money is a big part of my plan, especially as far as investing goes, which I think is critical to my success in the long term. So I was saying, worked really hard early, like around the time I was 30, and wanted to be successful in a certain way financially.
Well, let's go back to the music, because I'm trying to piece all the pieces together, and I know like one of the fundamental things that's interesting to me with you, and this is what we've been kind of poking around the whole time, is the relationship between creative pursuits and business.
Yeah.
And music was clearly a creative pursuit from the beginning, right? And a point of curiosity, but it made its way into business as you started to make money with it at 15 or 16.
Yeah.
Right. And then that moves into a podcast. But the gap there was, did you start the podcast with the objective of money?
No.
Okay. So but the podcast was around health?
Yeah.
Okay. Apps certainly had to be about money. At some point you had to pay, like, how were you making money and what was the gap?
Okay. So yeah, early in the podcast, I started developing and selling my own books and courses. And so no sponsors for the first
2012, 2013.
Yeah, this is back in like 2011, 2012. The same thing with the blog. I wound up writing like a manual and a book and PDFs, courses, that sort of thing. So early, I was selling that directly from the podcast, and people who were interested in the subject matter would buy it. With apps, that was kind of similar. You need to have a lot of scale with something that's lower priced like an app, right? And so I understood that, but we had scale, like basically trying to create the thing that our audience would want was part of the process. So like we had a big community of thousands of members who would kind of chime in and be like, hey, we want to see this from you. Or what if you made an app that's kind of like this? And then we would open up that line of communication and start building these ideas with people who were ultimately going to be the customer. And by doing that and kind of delivering it well at the right time, hundreds of thousands of app sales and hitting the top of the charts. I think one of them, Caveman Feast, hit number 6 in the entire app store on Apple and stayed up there like above Martha Stewart and above Angry Birds and above all this other stuff for like a minute. And I was just like, wow, this is pretty wild. But when I looked at the numbers, having 2 developers on staff, working with a partner and splitting some of the profits there, with an app that costs $2.99, that sometimes is discounted even more than that. Like even with hundreds of thousands of sales, the carrying cost, if you will, or the overhead of having this team of developers on staff that need to be there because Apple is going to say, hey, you need to redevelop by next week because we're having the software update and all this stuff is going to break. If you don't, your entire app is going to, like, that became so much management and kind of like a money pit, or I could see it turning into one eventually, that I'm just like, okay, this isn't the business that I want to be in. This is fun. Did I do it to make money? Not necessarily. Yes, we knew that it would be a profitable venture to some degree, but also the biggest reason that I started the blog and the podcast and that sort of thing is because I got sick in my early 20s by following my doctor's advice so well that it was just taking me straight downhill toward all of the problems I was trying to avoid, like high triglycerides, high blood pressure, history of heart disease, problems with the thyroid. And so after 18 months of working with one of the best doctors in DC with my fancy insurance that I had for the first time ever, I was like 30 pounds overweight. I had the biomarkers of, even though I was 23 or whatever I was, early 20s at the time, my biomarkers looked like a fat guy in his 40s. And I'm like, well, long story short, I came home one night shortly after I moved to Austin in 2008, and my entire apartment building was up in flames. I lost everything. All my instruments, the book I was working on, like everything. And so that was a critical moment for me where I looked at myself in the mirror because all I had was my clothes at that point. And I had this fat face. I'm like kind of puffy. And I was used to being like an athletic dude. Like I didn't really know what went wrong. I didn't know why I felt so bad. I was so sleepy and low energy. And so it took basically doing all the things that my doctor said would stop my heart to, like trying cyclic ketogenic dieting for the first time, not being afraid of fat, giving up the morning orange juice, not being afraid of dietary cholesterol, saturated fat, that sort of thing. All of a sudden, I went down to single percentage body fat, hitting all these personal bests. And that was by doing the opposite of what my doctor told me. So I was pissed off enough, like being the contrarian, to try to spread this message as quickly and as far as possible. So the blog was a big piece of that, and the newsletter, as well as the podcast. And then the apps became another mechanism to kind of spread this message. Real food can be fun. This is, and I learned this from the world of consulting and working with a lot of schools in education, that food tends to be the biggest lever of young people's lives. If you have great food available, whether it's at home or at school or at a friend's house, these kids perform better. They don't have as many behavioral issues, health issues. These transformations can be absolutely insane. And so once I kind of had that knowledge and some of the data and statistics and research that really says that this is true, trying to build that up from the grassroots was a big part of what I was doing. And I was grateful to be able to partner with a number of people who were aligned on that, and, publishing apps, publishing some of their books, helping with their launches, was something that I think allowed a lot of these messages to get out there. So now they're out. Like people have heard of eating like intermittent fasting now, or eating in a way that's slightly seasonally ketogenic, and eating locally like this is something that is not completely bizarre now. Whereas a lot of these things were really, in the woo sphere or edgy or wrong or dangerous and really thrown under the rug for a long time. So I feel like when that mission is accomplished or whatever, in my mind, I don't want to be repeating myself and doing the same thing again. So that's another reason why we kind of go after other projects here and there.
So you launched a podcast very early. You sold information products very early. You were pushing out blogs very early. What do you think has changed about how you release a message today versus 2012? And what stayed the same?
Yeah. Well, I would say back then I was practicing kind of the macro. This is pre-influencer, right? Like pre the word. And I don't like that word, but like as a macro platform, trying to reach as many people as possible. And so that requires that you're out there hitting it hard on other people's podcasts, going to events and speaking at conferences, putting out books, doing media appearances, whatever that is. It's an extraordinarily high pressure type situation, and it'll go on as long as you let it go. And so that's one way of doing it, where I eventually started up a big team and kind of had it operating like an agency for ourselves, as well as sometimes taking on clients. But then over the course of time, I found that I was taking on projects just to pay my team more than because it was really fulfilling or something that I thought would help the world as much as other things could. So over the years, hitting a few home runs and then reevaluating, taking some time off, we've decided to go small and scrappy and stay nimble, especially these days when you just don't know what's true on the internet. In the world of AI, anything can be generated, whether it's video, audio, conversations, written. Like you just don't know if that's the person anymore and that sort of thing. So the way to win now is in the macro influencer space is still volume, right? Starting up all these fan accounts and posting thousands of videos and thousands of clips is the way that people win, or at least the way that you get and stay big. But if you are honest about why you're doing this, which you have to be at some point. So for me,
it behooves you to be.
Yeah. Like
a lot of people, I think, figure that out years into it.
Yes. I've seen a lot. In fact, I've seen most people who attempt this completely burn out, even if they have enormous success for a while. Like most people burn out and sometimes flame out spectacularly, in a huge disaster around their financial life, their relationships, whatever it is. And so there's kind of the micro influencer that you can pivot into. And that's where you're, instead of trying to be everywhere and do everything on all these platforms and having a big team that's always there that you need to be accountable to. We decided to fire all of our clients, like pare down our team to the bare essentials and go after projects like the podcast, which I've continued to do for a long, long time. It was weekly or even more often than that. And for the past couple of years, it's been at least 2 a month. And sometimes it'll be more than that if there's a good reason for me to do more than that, or if there are a bunch of guests that I feel like need to be getting their message out there, like right then. This is something that has continued to be a part of the business. But honestly, the longer that it goes on and the more saturated that everything gets, the less profitable it becomes. And so I can see the podcasting world also turning into kind of like a passion project. But honestly, at this point in my career, having done really well with a number of business to consumer products, I got into venture capital and angel investing more than 10 years ago. And that kind of allows me to put my consultant hat back on and act more in the advisor position, business to business. And with our level of experience, I get a kick out of working in those sort of relationships these days. So being in front of the camera or behind the camera and doing all that work, like I've done that for a while. I don't really care about getting bigger or more famous or like, I kind of know what that is. And in fact, I want to be a little less famous, preferably. And once you define what you really want to do with your platform, then you can get after it and kind of generate income from the right thing. So for me, it's like a lot more profitable to have a whale or two client a year or take some, very high priced calls and consulting mini projects, helping other people with my direct expertise, or investing in companies and advising them directly with all the experience and connections that I have at this point to help them get off the ground. Cause like, I don't want to start another company right now. Like we've started a whole bunch of things. And right now I kind of want to, I don't want to spend more time sitting by myself in front of a computer on the internet. I want to be out there with people who are doing good work. And, with the rate of change increasing with everything, I think it's really important that people be honest about like the fact that having a huge team and a lot of overhead means that you can't move as quickly. And if you need to turn that ship around, which you might real quick in the age of AI and the way that everything's changing, financial system and the world of the internet, it's like, be really careful because there are going to be a lot of opportunities that pop up. And I think they're going to be weird and unanticipated, unexpected. And those are my favorite. So like to go back to one of your earlier questions, I love being early to things, like early to the party in technology, whether it's the blogosphere, podcasting, Bitcoin, crypto, like those worlds are so much more interesting to me at the beginning, the first few years that they're having conferences around it or something, than after everyone else has kind of flooded in and turned it into the circus. So I'm looking for those next worlds, whatever they are. And everything's changing so quickly that I think it's important that you kind of open up a piece of your availability in the future for those sorts of things. Because most of the biggest hits that I've had in my life have been from keeping that like reserve for if you meet someone who seems like the right partner to do a thing, that's how you do it. You're available. You meet with them and you say, yeah, I can do Tuesday. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that goes back to, there's tons of tie-ins here, but it's preserving some portion of your schedule or allocating some portion of your schedule to curiosity.
Yeah.
And you could look at that a variety of different ways, but I think that's, even though it seems sort of contrary to productivity, probably fairly efficient.
Yeah. And like what you said about you'll never work a day in your life if it's based around, what you want to do. That's what I'm always looking for. But for me, it's a moving target. Like with so many spinning plates and areas of interest, sometimes that's in the world of music. Sometimes it's in the world of writing. Other times it's podcasting or God knows some technology or whatever. I get really into making and producing 360 VR videos for years.
Oh, shit.
Made over 1,000 different experiences, a lot of them around education and virtual tours and that sort of thing. So it's like never monetized that. And the plan wasn't necessarily to do so, but I learned so much by doing that. And I'm so grateful for the fact that I spent time doing that because money is cool. But once you have enough, it becomes less cool, at least to me. Like I want to play a different game, if that makes sense.
Sure. I think that it's interesting. That's an interesting sentiment because many entrepreneurs are in the world of when is it enough?
Yeah.
And it never feels like enough. And there's always a new finish line, right? Or there's always a new touchdown. It's probably a better way to look at it.
Right.
But there's always a touchdown after that too.
Yeah.
And making the choice to say enough is enough and I'm going to shift my focus and have a different goal is probably where you find more satisfaction.
Yeah, I think so.
And contentment.
I hope so, but not always because we are defined by how well we do financially, right? So I think that was another trip for me because I was defining it as how much I made that year until I made oodles and then got taxed at like 50% and paid more in taxes that year than I would have paid in cash for my first house. Like, what?
Yeah.
This is what's happening and this is where it's going and this is what they're doing with it. Like that was after I had already worked in consulting with the government. And I knew that they were just burning it or taking it and all sorts of other stuff. So I was pissed and I looked into, well, you know, if they're going to, if I don't want to be financing this beast by working hard and doing well, like what are the other ways to do that? So that was one of the reasons I doubled down in angel and venture capital investing. Because then it's not income, it's capital gains, as well as, you know, looking at Bitcoin and crypto and these other alternatives to the dollar, because not only are you being taxed at that rate or some rate, but also our money has been devalued so much so quickly that we're basically, you know, how far the dollar goes has been cut in half in the past 4 years. And so if $100,000 a year used to be a good salary, now it's $200,000 a year. Right. That you need to be making to just be at $100,000 in our minds. And that sort of math makes the chasing of numbers or like building $100 million company or something like that. A lot of us kind of set these arbitrary goals and I do as well. Yeah. It's like, that's a complete illusion. Like, if you're defining it by the nominal terms of money, it's quicksand, you know, or it's too ephemeral to mean something in the future. And so it's important that we redefine exactly what we're going after. But for me, it's like when I went from making oodles in income to making a small amount to trying to minimize the tax burden and build up the assets that were investments. It's like, oh, is this how I define myself now? Am I like lower class because I'm not making this much money every year, but I do have like this much in assets? It's a weird trick of the mind that I think a lot of entrepreneurs go through.
It is. And I think that a lot of those ultimately, even if it's real money, it's still a vanity metric.
Yes.
So there is the question of what metric are you measuring? Mm-hmm. And across the board, the same metric might be vanity to one person and not the other.
Yeah.
So it is a dumb fucking mental game.
Yes.
You know, and I think it only comes into play really once you get to a point where you have made a bunch of money and you look at it and you can see a balance sheet move, meaning assets that you're holding but aren't producing money for you or a lot of money, but they're worth a lot of money. Right. And that would be a balance sheet move versus active income,
right?
Or passive income or whatever, but whatever you're taking home every year, so to speak. It's tricky business, man. Well, through the journey, because I know we're coming up on time here, which is too bad because I want to talk about the VC stuff and the investment and all of that jazz.
Yeah.
Another time, I suppose. It'd be great. What is a notable mistake that you've learned a lot from? What's the best mistake that you've made in your life?
Wow. I'm going to have to think about exactly what that is. I try not to have mistakes in my mind because the lessons that I've gotten from them, I think, are so important. But when I was younger, for sure, and when I was coming up, I had my blinders on and like long-term friends, people who you've known for a long, long time, those are exceptionally important relationships if you let them be and if you nurture them over time. But, you know, when I was working really hard and things were hitting and, you know, my phone was blowing up and everyone was trying to get in touch, it was too much for me, right? Like when things were really popping off and I was doing the TV show and the podcast was really hitting, like I couldn't walk down the street and even places that I didn't live or other countries that I went to without being recognized. And like people wanted to take pictures. And so that sort of overstimulation socially for me caused me to shut out almost everyone for a while, aside from my close family. And so that, probably caused more damage to some of my longer term, not even many, but just like a couple of them, like old friends where we lost touch and things happened in their life that I wasn't there for. And so I know a lot of the reasons that, I did well were because of that focus. But at the same time, it's helped me appreciate now that like being present with people is such a rare thing. And you don't know if you're going to be there the next time, not because they're dead, but maybe, right. Sometimes,
yeah, sure.
With close friends who, you live long enough and you see people who are your age and younger pass away and they're not there anymore. But mostly it's like you're not at that stage in your life anymore. Now they have kids or just like now they live in some other country. And so I think the biggest mistake was not being present, or it's being too present to my own version of the goals and the future that I wanted, and not being totally there for the people who are around me in my own life. And I think that this is something that's always going to be in balance, and we need to challenge ourselves to, crush it here, but also shut that off and be here for the people who we really need to be. And it's hard. Like, what is a distraction? What is a wedding that you don't need to go to compared to like one that you definitely need to be there and you can't miss? It's going to be a little bit different for all of us, but that's what I would say. It's finding that balance of like, how do you really meet your own goals and feel like you're doing your thing, but also be there for others and maintain and nurture those long-term relationships, because there's nothing better than an old great friend, like having those long-term relationships through multiple stages of life is such an incredible thing.
I love that. Abel James, love talking to you, man.
This is likewise. This is a blast. I look forward to the next one.
Yeah. Where should people find you if you want people to find you?
Sure. Yeah. You can go to abeljames.com, ABELJames.com. And I've got a bunch of books. The podcast is called The Abel James Show. And, not being facetious, you can drop me a line and shoot me an email or a DM wherever. I'll find it and get back.
I love it, man. Till next time.
Right on.
My director of marketing told me to read this. Thank you for tuning in to Beyond a Million. If you liked this podcast, please subscribe and drop a comment below. We'd love to know your thoughts. If you want to learn the strategies that our guests such as Neil Patel, Amy Porterfield, and Grant Cardone use to scale their business, you can find more episodes on our website at beyondamillion.com.